Years ago, we used to run a weekly series on this channel called Game Over, where we would recap the story of a classic game and then spoil the ending. Believe it or not, this series lasted more than 180 episodes and covered an impressive amount of games and genres. One of my favorite story breakdowns was the original Flashback, which recently saw a big uptick in views thanks to the release of the brand new sequel from Microids. If you watched my review, then you already know that I wasn't a huge fan of the clunky way it played or how broken the whole thing was. But I did commend the game for at least having an interesting story. Seeing as a lot of longtime fans will likely be scared off by the negative reviews, but still interested in the story, I thought this would be the perfect time to resurrect the Game Over series and give fans what they really want. Brace yourself for a lot of spoilers, because this is the full story breakdown of Flashback 2. Before we can talk about Flashback 2, what we really need to do is address what happened in the original game. You see, the year is 2140 and Conrad Hart has crash-landed his hoverbike on Titan. If that wasn't bad enough, he doesn't remember what happened, but he does find a hollow cube containing a recorded message from himself telling the amnesiac to meet a friend in New Washington. Once there, Hart fights off a bunch of cops and discovers that his friend Ian has a special memory chair. And that's not all, because as it turns out, Conrad has created a very special pair of sunglasses that can identify a species of shape-shifting aliens called morphs that are secretly living amongst us and are trying to take over the government. So now that he has his memories back, Hart realizes that he needs to return to Earth. Unfortunately, he doesn't exactly have the money, so Ian suggests that he goes on a Running Man-style game show called Death Tower. Of course, the problem with that is that he doesn't even have enough money to get the forged documents to go on the game show. So he's forced to take on a bunch of boring odd jobs in order to fight to the death on television. Long story short, he wins Death Tower and boards a ship that'll take him back to Earth. Now, in that first game, he gets to Earth, infiltrates the Paradise Club, and saves the day by blowing up the alien planet. This leads to a surprisingly downbeat ending, where our hero gets in a sleep pod and presumably goes somewhere far, far away from the morphs. But hang on, let's not get ahead of ourselves. What we need to do is go ahead and back up to the part where Conrad boards the ship that'll take him to Earth. Instead of safely making it to his final destination, Flashback 2 starts with his ship crashing back on Titan, seemingly changing the story. Normally, this would be the time where you'd be asking a bunch of questions, but there's no time for that, because Conrad is badly hurt and is in desperate need of a health pack. Now, fearing that the entire building might collapse on him, Hart races around looking for the exit. He finds one, but not before picking up a weird triangle-shaped card. What does it mean? What could it be? Well, as it turns out, it's connected to the local Triangle Mafia, which is controlled by Mike Corleone. Conrad is convinced that his friend Ian is being held by these gangsters, and Corleone agrees to cough up the details if our hero can help him win a mech boxing match. There's just one problem. Conrad doesn't have enough money to buy a mech, not even one of those old junky ones. So, much like the first game, he takes on a bunch of odd jobs to earn the cash and win the fight. Thankfully, Conrad is a natural at fighting mechs and easily wins. This results in Corleone revealing that Ian is being held captive in a factory in Atlantica. While this information was technically true, what Corleone didn't mention is that Ian is not alone. He's being held in a cell right next to a red-headed woman named Joanna, who tells us that she's part of a movement that fights against the exploitation of the jungle. It's worth noting that she is not the only woman that Conrad runs into in this heavily guarded warehouse. He also spies on a woman named Lazarus, who has been torturing the prisoners in order to extract information and, more importantly, gain new bodies for the aliens to morph into. It's here where we learn that the aliens are planning to overthrow the government by killing and replacing President Frost with an exact double. Now, having helped the two prisoners escape, Conrad and Ian are welcomed into Joanna's political group, which gives us a place to rest and ready up for the next fight. The top priority right now is to warn the president, but they're gonna need to make sure that they're talking to a real human, not the shape-shifting alien. The good news is that Conrad has a pair of glasses that would be perfect for this situation. Unfortunately, the bad news is that the glasses are back in New Tokyo, which is a lot more than just a hover bike ride away. Okay, so before we take that flight to New Tokyo, this is probably a good time to talk about one of the story's lingering questions. Just what the hell is going on with this game's timeline? As it turns out, Ian has a theory of what's going on. You see, he thinks that Conrad is a clone that was created by his old mentor, Professor Clark. Knowing how important Conrad would be for this mission, the professor essentially photocopied our hero. In other words, if that was Conrad B. Hart in the original Flashback, then this is Conrad C. Hart. Regardless of whether you buy into this theory or not, you're probably thinking that you're gonna have a tough time sneaking past security and catch a flight to New Tokyo. Well, not so much, because as it turns out, Joanna's group is really good at making fake IDs, so it's just no problem at all. In fact, things go so well that our hero ends up running into Helen Clark, an old friend from school who's also the niece of Professor Clark. What are the odds of that happening? Yeah, there's nothing suspicious about that at all. Actually, there isn't. This game wants you to think that maybe Conrad is being played by this new character, but he's not. However, Professor Clark, on the other hand, is in real danger. According to one of his colleagues, Kenya Lynch, the professor was captured by the aliens. What's more, many of the professor's colleagues have been rounded up by the police. Something is clearly up. And I tell you, if you didn't believe that before, you will when Helen and Professor Lynch are arrested and taken aboard the menacing ship. Not willing to be left behind, Conrad leaps into action and boards the enemy ship. It's here where he makes a huge discovery. Joanna has been a double agent this entire time, revealing the protest group's plans to none other than General Lazarus. Conrad knows that he needs to get back to Titan to warn the others, so he hatches a plan to use one of the escape pods to fly back to the planet to get the information to President Frost. Little does he know that a mysterious figure has latched itself onto the escape pod. And that isn't even the most pressing issue, because a masked person with a bazooka blows up the escape pod in just one hit. Alright, if you're having a weird sense of deja vu, then you're not alone, because Conrad once again crash lands on the jungles of Titan. Thankfully, he still has all of his memories, so it's not a complete repeat of what happened in that first game. There's more good news, because Helen also manages to survive the crash landing, though she dies about 10 seconds later when a plant gobbles her up. Conrad wants to mourn, but there's no time for that. Remember that mysterious figure that caught a ride on the escape pod? Well, it also survived, and now it's looking for a one-on-one fight. That proves to be a big mistake, because Conrad quickly defeats the boss, and then immediately passes out when he breathes in some of the jungle's toxins. When he awakes, well, how do I put this? He has a conversation with the tree. To be fair, it is the Great Tree who talks about how aliens enslaved the forest and looted their resources. Yeah, that sucks, but wait, there's more. As it turns out, Professor Clark is now able to speak to Conrad, though it's not the Professor Clark that you know. You see, instead, it's an alternate dimension Clark who pulled Conrad into a multiverse in order to defeat the alien's master brain. More than anything else, this confirms that Conrad isn't a clone at all. Rather, we're dealing with two different parallel dimensions. In one dimension, he made it to Earth safely, and the events of Flashback 1 took place. However, in this game, his ship crash landed, and, well, you know the rest. In order to successfully defeat the aliens, both Conrads are going to need to work together across dimensions, which is every bit as challenging as it sounds. But again, let's not get ahead of ourselves, because we still need to get out of the jungle and warn the president. The good news is that the first part of that is surprisingly easy. As it turns out, a scout shows Conrad the secret entrance to the village of the Banished, where Shaman reveals that he too has a beef with General Lazarus. Better still, they have an underground passage that'll take Conrad straight to New Washington. And if that wasn't enough, they have a mech that he can use to get there. Oh yeah, they also mentioned that Helen is still alive and recuperating in the village, but that's not important right now, because did you hear me? We're gonna ride a mech! Now, I'm not gonna bore you with the details of assembling this mech, but it involves collecting a battery and then finding a bunch of different mech parts. The important part is that once you put the mech together, General Lazarus and her army invades the village of the Banished in a cinema that has completely unacceptable frame rate. Shawman agrees to stay behind and hold the army back because it's vital that Conrad is able to get to New Washington and complete his mission. Back in the city, Conrad tells his fellow freedom fighters that Joanna is a traitor, but they already expected as much. The group is gonna scramble the president's defenses, which should give our hero enough time to sneak in and show him the hollow cube of what's really going on. Of course, getting to the president is gonna be a Herculean task that'll probably take... Oh wait, his office is in a nearby mall? Okay, I guess it's gonna be a piece of cake. Once Conrad crashes into the 22nd century's Oval Office, he runs into the single most predictable problem he could possibly have. There are two presidents. That's right, one of them is the real deal, and the other one is a morph. Good thing Hart has a pair of those morph-detecting glasses from the first game, which allows him to safely take out the imposter and get the important news to the real President Frost. Ooh, crisis averted. Now, in order to defeat the alien invasion once and for all, Conrad is gonna need to fight his way onto the alien ship, not unlike what happens in the first game. In fact, Professor Clark tells our hero that he's gonna need to wait until the exact moment of the conjunction when the Conrad and Flashback 1 terminates the master brain in the alternate dimension. Of course, before we can do that, we first need to confront General Lazarus, who ditches her, and I'm gonna quote here, weak female form, and shows us her alien side. She also reveals that Conrad may also be a morph, which seems to be more of a psychological play than a real twist. That's left a little open-ended in the game, but we're just gonna table that for right now. Now, after the fight with the alien formerly known as General Lazarus, we're treated to a 3D recreation of the first Flashback's final stage. This is where the game shifts the camera perspective to look more like a third-person shooter, more resembling what we saw in Fade to Black. Despite the fact that you can't change the camera controls, this is actually a pretty cool section that even shows what's happening in the other Flashback game in the upper right corner. As instructed, the goal is to trigger the conjunction simultaneously with our 16-bit counterpart in order to destroy the master brain once and for all. Conrad is able to get his timing down and blow everything up, and this is what happens next.
Throughout the solar system, thousands of individuals come forward as Nyaka, the alien race also known as the Morphs. Controlled until recently by the Master Brain from a distant world, they're now proud to belong to the human population.
He did it. Conrad saved the world. He even saved it in all dimensions at once.
I myself have an important confession to make. I am a Nyaka. Until recently, under the control of the Master Brain. I am now free to think and act as I want, and willing to be part of human society.
Do you think he made it out alive?
Conrad? I'm sure he's somewhere out there, safe. If he could hear me, I'd yell, "You won't get rid of me that easily, Conrad Hart."
No! So close!
The synchronization window is closed, and we failed to kill both Master Brains at the same moment. So the Morphs will be able to regroup and try again to invade us sometime in the future. But at least that bought us some time to organize the resistance before their return. You played your role, Conrad. Now take a shuttle and go back home.
Thanks, Professor. For everything.
Good luck, my boy. Maybe we'll meet again in another dimension.
Okay, so that's the bad ending. The good ending uses most of the same cinema, but the ending is a little bit different. We're gonna pick up with the ending right after the reporter has revealed that he's one of those morph aliens.
Damn. The other me.
There are really two of you, and this one must be mine. Sorry, Conrad. That's not what I meant.
Don't worry, Aisha. I understand. There's only one way to know who this guy really is. Let's wake him up.
Like I said in my review, the story isn't nearly as complicated as you might find in something like Mass Effect or Starfield, but I think it does make a lot of sense in the Flashback universe. I like the way that the final bit pays tribute to the first two games, and the ending certainly sets up the possibility for a sequel that doesn't specifically follow the events of Fade to Black. Honestly, as a big fan of that first Flashback game, I was curious where they were going to take this story and if it would still make sense. And I feel like what they came up with was something kind of unexpected. Sure, I suppose the multiverse thing is a bit played out now, but honestly, I didn't see it coming. And the game does a good job of sending you down the wrong path when you think that you're a clone. All the silly sci-fi stuff completely worked on me. Bad the game around it is so broken and clunky. Oh well, I guess you can't have everything. Hey, thanks for watching me break down the story of Flashback 2. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we have a whole playlist with more than 180 episodes just like this one. In fact, this is the first new episode of the show since May of last year. So, let me know if you want to see more Game Over episodes in the future. Now, here's the question I have for you. Would you be interested in a Flashback 3? And if so, would you want him to ignore Fade to Black? Let me see your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with a brand new episode of the Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.